Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 2024 World Table Tennis for Health Congress in Maizières-lès-Metz, where we unite to explore the incredible power of sport to enhance health and well-being globally. During the 2 days of the Congress, we will celebrate the role table tennis plays in fostering physical and mental health, bridging communities, and inspiring changes. It's a global Congress with join 150 online participants with on-site participants. My name is Isabelle, and it's a great honor to be here as a moderator of this Congress. I am chair of ITTF Sports Science and Medical Committee.
Recording in
and
progress.
I'm also professor at University of Campinas from Brazil. I will be guiding you through these sessions and discussions as we explore the vital role of table tennis in promoting health and well-being. I'm excited to be part of this important event and look forward to a productive and insightful Congress together. Now, I would like to invite Petra Sorling, President of ITTF and ITTF Foundation, to open the second edition of World Table Tennis for Health Congress.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, speakers, delegates, and all our friends following us online. It's a great honor for me as president of ITTF Foundation to open the second World Table Tennis for Health Congress. But how did it happen? How come an international federation table tennis president is opening a World Table Tennis for Health Congress? Well, table tennis has a long history. We have a history of para-table tennis included, as we are one sport, one family. Already more than 15 years we have been together as one family, one sport. When we saw, some few years ago, actually here in France, they were the first ones. Table Tennis Association here in France already in 2012 started to cooperate with the Association for Parkinson. We were later on the train in ITF and ITF Foundation. However, we saw some years ago, already in 2018, we were approached by some players suffering from Parkinson, but they saw that playing table tennis helped them. And actually, our great friend here and legend, Zoran Primorac, was one of them approaching us in the ITF back in the days of 2018 during the World Championships in Halmstad, Sweden. We were thinking in the ITF at that time, as we were just about to launch our foundation, where we say table tennis for all, for a better life. Here, there is a connection. What can we do to help and support this community to be part of our family, at the same time, in the same way as we did with our para-table tennis friends? So we started with events. And the first one edition was in New York, USA, some years ago. And since then, we have had some events, first for players with Parkinson. Later on, we also included people with a diagnosis of Alzheimer. However, when sitting in the closed-loop system of the World Championships in Chengdu, China, some few years ago, in 2022, the good thing when being in a closed-loop system where you cannot go anywhere is that you have to talk to each other. And also in this small group, we had a round table among our friends in ITTF and ITTF Foundation. And we said, why don't we go bigger? Because one thing is to hold an event. We know that we have very good outcome of this event. We know the players loves it. We know that the entourage, the families and friends can enjoy together. But what next? How can we interact together with the different organizations around? How can we spread a message to our member associations, our 227 member associations around the world? Well, we have to also link to scientific studies. And that's why I'm very, very pleased that together with our committee here, we are working together to create more knowledge and awareness around the world. Because we know that through sport, we can really create better quality of life for those suffering from different diseases. I came directly from the IF Forum in Lausanne, where I listened to a very, very interesting session held by the World Health Organization. They say the same. Inactivity is very expensive for the society. So we have to be active, we have to move ourselves. And I was extremely happy and proud that they were mentioning table tennis during this session as one sport that we have done something, but we haven't done everything. But we will do more during these days here for the Congress, and I would particularly thank everyone from the ITF Foundation who make it possible for us to have these 2 beautiful days here together. I'd like to thank our moderator, our chair of our committee for sports science and medical in ITF, and also my vice president in charge of this area for pushing us to move forward and to do more. And together here today and tomorrow, we can put a next step into the history of our way forward, table tennis for all for a better life. Thank you and most welcome to these days.
Petra, much appreciate. Thank you. And it's so important to hear you to talk about the importance and the impact of the event, of the development of new researchers about the table tennis and the improvement of the disease, and also in the life of the people who participate and are engaged to promote table tennis for health and well-being. Many thanks.
Petra, merci beaucoup. Il est très important pour nous tous de vous écouter, de t'écouter, parler de l'importance et de l'impact de la compétition sur la vie des personnes qui participent et qui s'engagent pour promouvoir le tennis de table pour la santé et le bien-être de tous. Encore une fois, merci beaucoup, Petra.
So, let's move on for the first session of the day. We welcome Philipp Müller-Wirth, who is the Chief of Sports Section Sector for Social and Human Science at UNESCO. He is currently spearheading UNESCO's innovative global alliance, Fit for Life, which help governments, not-for-profit organizations, as well as private investors, unlock the full potential of sports for development. Philip, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Big thanks to ITTF for inviting UNESCO to be at the opening of your Congress. I'm very pleased to be with you, at least online. Sorry, I have a very tight travel schedule and couldn't make it in person, but very happy to be here, at least on the screen. First of all, I'm very happy to see so many women on the stage in a leading role. That's already a big achievement for important sport organizations such as yourself. And let me try to explain, first of all, UNESCO and what UNESCO is doing in sport. We can move to the next slide. I'm working here now since over 30 years. Just a little background. I've been developing UNESCO's relations with the business community for more than 15 years. In my first part of the career, at a time where public-private partnerships were not yet mainstreamed, it was a very exciting, innovative subject. And since 2014, I'm working in the sports section that I direct now since 3 years. UNESCO is not so well known for its role in sport, more for its role in World Heritage that you all know about, I guess. But UNESCO has a unique mandate in the United Nations system when it comes to sport. Governments turned to UNESCO in the mid-70s when sport became international, professional, and commercial. And they turned to us with a very clear mandate. That is, number one, to ensure that everyone has a chance to access the opportunities that sports provide for well-being, for health, for education, and to ensure that sport remains, in light of this commercial trend, integer and ethically in line with human rights standards and others. Of course, as the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, The educational perspective on sport is what brought member states mainly to UNESCO. UNESCO is not a non-governmental organization, as some people think. We are the opposite. We're an intergovernmental organization with 194 member states. And we're the only UN organization that has sport ministries, sport policymakers as a constituency directly. We mainly serve them, and they tell us what we should be doing. So everything I will present this morning is the agenda set to us here, the Secretariat in Paris headquarters, by the sport ministers of the world. The vision on sport from the outset in the mid-70s has been very clearly focusing on the bottom of the sporting pyramid, if I may say so, meaning the participation in sport by everyone. This is including sport in its very diverse forms, including competitive sport, but also traditional sports and games, recreation, play, dance, the sport really in its full diversity. And of course, it includes physical education in schools. And we'll come back to the critical role of physical education later. For doing this, we have a number of very specific instruments. We have set the rights, the principles, and the goals that should underpin the organization of sport around the world through our International Charter for Physical Education, Physical Activity, and Sport that has been revised in 2015, notably to include a very strong gender equality and disability inclusion component. We have the Anti-Doping Convention that was adopted in 2004, and that is meanwhile ratified by 192 member states as the only legally binding normative instrument in the field of sport integrity in the world. We have an intergovernmental committee for physical education and sport, and many of you will think, oh, a committee, nothing much happens. That's not true. In this committee, we not only have 18 elected member states from all the regions of the world that every year re-elect new members to renew the membership of this committee, but also important sports organizations such as the IOC, FIFA, and others. We have business, we have non-governmental organizations, and as you will see very importantly, the world of research and education, academia, that need to underpin everything we recommend for policy development. I'll move on to the next slide. So you see, we have the sport mandate, and here is one of the specific things to UNESCO. We host regularly the World Conference of Sport Ministers, ministers responsible for sport and physical education. MINEPS, all these acronyms, CJEPs for the committee, MINEPS for the conference, are dating back to the French dominated period in the mid-70s when all these bodies were created. I don't want to explain all these acronyms, but MINEPS is our a unique ministerial conference, the last we held in Baku, Azerbaijan last year in June. You see the participants, member states represented, but again, the sport movement, academia, private and public institutions of different kinds, and we'll come back to the mix that we try to rally around the sport agenda. Next slide, please. Now, let me take a step back. We are, of course, in a conference that is dedicated to health improvement through sport. And we do have a lot of, and you mentioned WHO, who lead the physical activity and health agenda within the UN system. But let me turn back to the situation that is still, unfortunately, prevalent in most countries of the world. You have heard from WHO probably that 4 out of 5 youth worldwide do not meet the WHO minimal physical activity standard. So we talk here about a physical inactivity pandemic in the world, and that is really having dramatic consequences, as was already said by the previous speakers, not only in terms of the health of the populations in the world, mental health and physical health, and mental health being an increasing concerns for governments around the world, but also, as you also heard, on the related costs for public services in dealing with the diseases that physical inactivity is accelerating. Why is this situation so dramatic? I think one of the explanations is that decision makers and policymakers perceive sport as something quite wealthy, a quite wealthy ecosystem. What they see in the media is a very wealthy elite sports system where sports stars are increasingly highly paid, where media rights are developing exponentially. And so what they perceive is, why would I give my funding, my government support to something that is already so wealthy? It will trickle down. And again, this was very blatant at the time of COVID, when we saw that governments were capable of mobilizing trillions of dollars for COVID recovery programs, but almost nothing of this recovery was devoted to sport, at least not to grassroots sport and participation. And yet we do have more and more robust data that shows that sport is a low-cost, high-impact means to build physical, but also social and emotional resilience. And so how come that governments did not look at sport as one of the most relevant solutions to be invested in times of COVID recovery? And again, the explanation is that the perception of sport is mainly dominated by those who can really change things, by those who have the power to change policies and scale up investments, is mainly perceived as an already well-funded ecosystem. We just throw at you one number, but there are many studies we work on, and we'll come back to that a little later. UEFA will have developed one of the most sophisticated social return on investment in sport models in the world, estimate the cost of not participating in football in Europe alone at around 40 billion euros per year. Now you can imagine what that amounts to if we include other sports and other regions in the world. Next slide, please. Now, this situation was the backdrop against which we launched our Fit for Life Global Sports Initiative that I'm happy to present to you today. Over to the next slide. So Fit for Life is all about bringing sports stakeholders and non-sport stakeholders together to, number one, understand the power of sport to bring about health, social inclusion, education, employment, and other development goals. When we say other stakeholders, here you have the slide that you know probably from your own strategies and presentations. This is, of course, for us as a core target audience, policymakers, especially, of course, in physical education. That is a government-driven sports that is organized mainly. If we look at the sport minister's portfolio around the world, they mainly spend their time and budget to organize competitions. Now we need to help them to be capable of activating the grassroots sport agenda. We have, of course, sports organizations such as yourselves, educators, we come back to that, very important, development partners such as international funds, bilateral development aid agencies, sport for development organizations, and of course, athletes who are very powerful ambassadors for this agenda. Over to the next slides. So the key objectives is for Fit for Life is, first of all, to support our member states, our clients, to develop inclusive quality policies on physical education and physical activity and sport. And again, as I said, right now, sport ministers, we all know, we are realistic, are not the most powerful ministers in their government. Very often they have a sport plus portfolio, sport and tourism, sport and youth. Very often they come from minority parties who get a seat on the table in coalitions, and very often their shelf life is not very long. However, when they work collectively through UNESCO, they do set standards for the sport movement that are very important. They do drive change processes through UNESCO that are very relevant, I believe, to ITTF and other sports organizations. Second, we need if we all are convinced that sport can bring about positive change in terms of health, but also, as I said, in terms of social inclusion, education, employability, security, and other sustainable development goals, we need to ensure that the resources are provided for scaling sport programs run by governments and by sports organizations and other actors. So this is very much about public and private investments into grassroots sport as a core focus area. And I'll come back to that, how this works a little later. And of course, the change we talk about concerns very much teaching, learning, knowledge exchange. A lot of the players and a lot of the agendas we promote are new to most of the people we talk to. And so there's a great need for training policymakers, teachers, coaches, administrators, managers about how to make the case, both the business and the government case, for sport as a sustainable development solution. And of course, to regularly ensure that we reflect the core challenges that member states face, both nationally but also internationally, to make the case for sport to be relevant to emerging problems or longer-term problems that will remain on top of the agenda, such as climate change. Next slide. So looking back a little again, in 2017, the Kazan Action Plan has set a roadmap that connected sport to specific sustainable development goals and targets. We did something in Kazan together with all the other UN agencies that rarely happens. We did not say sport is good for all the SDGs. We said scientific evidence, the evidence we have, shows that sport can make a significant contribution to 9 out of the 17 SDGs, and we depicted exactly where this evidence existed. In 2017, of course, in the 7 years that followed, much more evidence has been gathered, and again, we come back to that a little later. Evidence on non-sport outcomes. So this is something really important. We have to, sports stakeholders that we all are, you in the room and we here in our sports section in UNESCO, and that is also many colleagues working in field offices around the world, not just the sport team here at Paris headquarters. We need to get away from saying last year we had 5,000 people running in our marathon. This year we were 7,000. This sort of language is not relevant for non-sport stakeholders. If you want education ministries or authorities, health authorities, authorities in charge of gender equality in countries, if you want development banks, if you want bilateral development agencies, UN funds, private investors, to understand the relevance of sport, we need to talk about outcomes that are relevant for them. And participation rates in sport are not relevant for non-sport stakeholders. So we need to say what has changed in the lives of participants thanks to participating in this marathon. What has changed in their families for the better, in their communities, and what has changed on an aggregate level through the different sporting events and activities. And so the language we need to use to bring in new stakeholders, to convince investors, public and private investors, that grassroots sport, participation in sport, is a worthy cause to invest in, is of course data. We need very robust evidence on the positive change sport can bring about. And good news for your Congress today, in the field of health, both especially physical, not so much yet mental, we do have very robust evidence that is already translated into policies such as prescriptions of physical activity that can be reimbursed by social security systems. That is happening in more and more countries, but this should be just the beginning. We in UNESCO believe similar trends could evolve in the field of education, inclusion, and economic development. Over to the next slide. So data is the name of the game, as everywhere in the world. Of course, it's all about people, and we should never lose the focus on people. I'll come back to that in a second. We need to talk a common language. We all in the sport ecosystem have different ways in showing the impact of sport on communities, on people, on families, on societies. And if we want to be capable of scaling up public and private investments into grassroots sport, we need to get our evidence together. And this is a typical role, of course, of a UN organization. The sport ministers have the ultimate authorities to endorse, accept, and adopt common definitions around sport, around the impact of sport, around methodologies to measure the impact of sport on people. There's still a lot of data gaps. Again, I will come to that a little later. We already know barely in most countries of the world who is participating, because more and more young people in particular do not become members of sport organizations. They organize themselves in different ways without necessarily adhering to existing sports clubs and federations. And so there's a real data gap in terms of already assessing who is participating, which of course is a basic number. I said earlier, participation itself is not sufficiently convincing to investors, but if we don't even know who participates as a proxy for outcomes, then we have a hard time making the case for scaling up sport programs around the world. A lot of data gaps, as I said, not necessarily so much in the domain of physical health, but in the fields of education, there is still an inclusion a lot we need. I point to two areas here that are very high on the agenda of our member states. First, gender equality, and second, disability inclusion. There's very little data that we have yet ready to make the case for scaled investment in sport to deliver against these two agendas. And that is normal, because here we talk about a change that is not only affecting the beneficiaries, women and girls on the one hand, and persons with physical or intellectual disabilities, 13% of the world population, by the way, but also their communities. The change we want to bring about for these beneficiaries needs to affect their families, their communities, because that's what prevents them from being participants with full rights in different sport and physical education programs. And very important when we talk about evidence, a lot of investors we talk to say, yes, it is very important that we have methodological literature reviews of robust evidence that is out there, but the most important thing for us is to test how this works. We need to learn how these projects are operating, how you can bring about these different non-sport outcomes, and we want to run pilot projects, proof of concept projects with you, and to know how this works. Once we know, then we can decide whether we can invest at a larger scale. So projects are part of our research program. And again, it is important that we try and have as many different case studies as possible around the world, because the context, as you well know, for sport are very different in different countries, and the outcome areas are very diverse. And that is good news in a situation in which there's an increasing market of social private investment funds in the world that have not yet fully understood, but start to understand that sport can deliver across a very broad range of outcomes in very diverse contexts in a way that is more cost effective than other interventions. Next slide, please. So again, this is mainly about policymakers, but not only. We know that sport organizations are, in most cases, probably the service providers that need to be helped to deliver, to configure their activities in view of outcomes and not outputs, as I said earlier. And this requires really a change in terms of the way in which we all organize sport at local, national, and international levels. Yes, physical and mental well-being is very high on the agenda of all our member states, But believe me, there is a lot we shouldn't underestimate in terms of the relevance of sport for education systems, for social inclusion, but also for economic development. Next slide. As I said, when we talk about integration, we are fully aware that any impact of sport always happens at the local level. It's when young people start playing table tennis, when they start swimming, or not young people, by the way. We talk about all age groups, but a focus, of course, on young people, because that's where the physical inactivity pandemic hits the most. So any impact happens and occurs on a local level. And it is on that level that we need to capacitate sports organizations to articulate what they are doing in terms of non-sport outcomes. We know and we're much aware that sports organizations, sport clubs already have a hard time in mobilizing participants, in organizing their competitions. Their capacity to measure impact is limited. And so we need to make it easy for them, pragmatic. And I think, again, it is very important that we all talk a common language on basic methodologies for articulating the impact that you in table tennis generate, but also very similarly the situation in other sports, in other contexts. Then again, how do we bring this together? How do we aggregate the different data? Again, we need a common language to be able to articulate the changes and the positive impact on a macro level, because that's where decision makers look at. And then again, globally, I explained we need a legitimate organization, and UNESCO clearly is one in terms of standard setting in the field of sport, to endorse certain frameworks, to promote certain good practice, to define what do we mean by good practice, and to bring policymakers together with those who deliver the impact, and that is coaches, teachers, and sports organizations. Next slide. So again, I mentioned for doing this, we have very specific mechanisms. It is not just the sport-specific ones, but UNESCO also has networks of academic chairs in around the world. We have an increasing number of sport-specific chairs. So if ITTF or other sports organizations want to be sure they have the best possible expertise in a specific field, we can point them to experts in gender and sport, experts in disability and sport, experts in integrity and governance of sport. We start having a quite robust network that represents the different regions and fields of research and education in sport policy development. We have a network of 11,000 associated schools. Sometimes it is very difficult for sports organizations with their private sector partners to access the school system. We can do this, provided, of course, we have a good proposition to make, because we directly work with 11,000 schools around the world. Next slide, please. We also looked at the request of our member states, and of course, we had this year the Paris 24 Olympic and Paralympic Games into the sustainable environmental and social impact of major sport events. The vision we have is sport events are not an end in themselves. They should be a means towards a bigger objectives in terms of transforming the sport ecosystem to some extent in the way I explained, to deliver outcomes for the communities that are concerned. Our vision is that sport ministries very often disappear when it comes to sport events, and the agenda is driven by other stakeholders, the international federations sometimes the sponsors, other levels in government. We believe we should apply and bid for hosting these events with a very clear vision to make them catalysts for a positive change around sport for development in a country. Sport for development strategies do not really exist in countries, and we know when it comes to bigger events, different parts of the government start working together to deliver these events. They should also work together. So again, public authorities in charge of education, of health, of sport, of youth development, of gender equality, should use these events to start developing a common plan that defines very clear non-sport objectives to which sport can contribute, and engages not only the sports sector, but also other sectors of policy making and stakeholders in driving a more consolidated and strategic approach to sport, and major sport events are a very important opportunity to do so. This is not just compliance with a lot of standards that already exist and sometimes are very complicated for federations to follow, such as ISO and others. This is really about capacity development in the vision that drives the application to host an event. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, we had the Olympic Games here in Paris. Our Director General is French, so you can imagine we had a very tough year so far with no summer holidays. We organized two conferences, one before the Olympic Games and another one before the Paralympic Games, together with the International Paralympic Committee, on the occasion on which we presented a number of knowledge products that I invite you to examine. We produced a report on the social impact of sport that really compilates the most robust scientific evidence that exists so far, that is structured according to different outcome areas. So we have health, we have peace building and citizenship, we have education, we have social inclusion, gender equality. So you can see, again, this is really a sort of gap analysis. We need more research in fields that is very relevant to a number of your partners, actual current partners or potential partners, in terms of how can table tennis help girls and women? How can table tennis empower young people? How do we create skills through table tennis that are relevant for the job market? And so on. Here you have a starting point that identifies how to go about what types of research are most relevant. Giving you an example, cost-benefit analyses are very scarce. How much do you need to invest in sport programs with what sort of social and economic return? We need to invest more in this sort of study, and of course, we'd be happy to work with ITTF to do so. We issued a sport and gender equality game plan, again, that tries to bring together the different actors that very often don't work sufficiently together to drive the gender equality agenda. That is a huge agenda. And again, that's why I was so happy to see women opening this conference. Unfortunately, women are still underrepresented in all areas in sport, especially in leadership positions, not just in the sport movement, but also in policy making. And that needs to change if we want to pay tribute to the fact that women are half of the humanity and probably the more dynamic and innovative part of humanity in many parts of the world. We issued a report on the global state of physical education around the world, dramatic insights. More than 60% of our member states spend less than 2% of their national education budget on physical education. Other conclusion, as for other areas, including gender equality, the core priority must be training of coaches and of teachers to deliver better programs. There is not sufficient investment in teacher and coach training, and that needs to be really stepped up because they are the drivers of change. With the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee, we issued a call to action on the occasion of our Disability Inclusion Conference that is going to be transformed into a roadmap that very clearly sequences and prioritizes actions to be taken by policymakers, by the sport movement, by media, by academia educators. So we start understanding how important it is that we scale and improve the way in which we deal with persons with disabilities, 13% at least of the world population, and we should also count their families and their communities as beneficiaries of sport programs that address these issues. We learned at this conference, for example, that on average, a French person with a disability needs to travel more than 50 kilometers to find a sports organization that would deliver something that is adapted to her or his disability. And finally, Just to update you, we had a session of the executive board that just ended here. This is not sport specific, but UNESCO's overall governance, and the executive board adopted a resolution on tackling violence against women and girls in sport and ensuring safe sport. It's a very pressing agenda. We know there is systematic mental and physical abuse of young people in particular in sport, and we need to pay much more attention to this phenomena if we want sport to be a credible solution for our governments and for our partners. Last slide, I would finish with a few challenges that I already mentioned throughout the presentation. We need to jointly work and to work in a more coherent fashion to address data gaps that still are massive in the field of the social and economic benefits of grassroots sports in particular. And we need to get into around the table potential investors who have the means to resource our activities as sports organizations or sport for development organizations. And that means there are a lot of players that are very interested as soon as you frame your partnership discussion around investments and not so much about impact measurement or needs. There are investment opportunities. There's a lot of funding available on condition that we articulate what we do in terms of the language that these funds and public entities speak. And I also think, as I mentioned, of local authorities, mayors. A lot of things can be done quicker at the local level than on the national level. But of course, we have education authorities, we have health authorities that should be understanding that they're missing an opportunity if they do not invest more in sport. As I said, there is a sum of the achievements I think I have mentioned in my presentation. It's not so much about me to talk about achievements. That's my assistant to put achievements here. I think the Fit for Life Alliance that we have created in Baku last year is growing ever, and I think it shows that we need to structure the multi-stakeholder nature of our work on sport for development. It is really about non-sport stakeholders. The most important thing I think that has to change is we talk too much to ourselves, already convinced what we need to do is bring to the table those who are not aware of the power of sport and of course of table tennis. Thank you very much. I'm ending here. Thank you.
Philip, thank you for your contribution. It adds significant value to our discussion. Very, very interesting to listen to you. And we learn about Fit for Life, a multi-stakeholder alliance of UNESCO for collective action and knowledge, which join young people, policymakers, academic people, private sections, educators, development partners, sports organizations, and personalities in order to supporting member states to scale and develop an inclusive quality policies on physical education and physical activity. Thank you so much.
Philippe, merci pour votre contribution. Vous avez apporté une valeur supplémentaire à nos discussions. Maintenant, je voudrais partager avec l'audience en français certains points clés de votre présentation. Nous avons appris ce qu'est Fit for Life. En français, je traduirais ça pour en forme pour la vie. C'est bien? D'accord. C'est en fait une alliance de l'UNESCO avec toutes les parties prenantes pour une action collective et une connaissance commune. Alors, les parties prenantes rassemblent les jeunes, les décideurs politiques, les académies, le secteur privé, les éducateurs, les partenaires du développement, les organisations sportives, des personnalités avec tous des objectifs communs en vue de réguler et d'offrir une participation inclusive avec des politiques de qualité sur l'éducation physique et l'activité physique. Merci Philippe.
So, our next session will focus on our specific sports, table tennis, with remarkable benefits. Let's dive into table tennis for health, the benefit for active aging, exploring how this dynamic sport supports health, aging, and longevity. First, let's welcome Liz France, neuroscientist at the University of Otago, New Zealand. Liz conducts research into brain health and cognition in people with neurological disorders. After a career in track and field in the USA, she is now an active table tennis player who trains every day and competes whenever her schedule allows. And she is optimistic about the future where increased numbers of people She is optimistic about a future where increased number of people enjoy the benefits of table tennis for brain health and overall well-being. She's come all the way from New Zealand to present at the Congress. So please give her a huge cheer.
Thank you very much. It's really lovely to be here today, and I'm so glad I came all the way out here with my lovely son. Enjoying to meet the new people, to watch some lovely tournament matches, really nice long rallies, and to share with you what I think are some of the benefits of table tennis, the greatest sport in the world. I think this initiative by ITTF is just a fantastic one. I'm so excited to be participating in it. Let's see, green. Oops.
Every time you think about what it takes to be your best, remember you were always a champion and nothing less. You have the abilities for building up towards your goals. It might take a few steps, but soon you'll be on a roll. Scaling an incline, you'll feel just fine if you pace yourself. Improving upon your health, feeling the team spirit. You can be right there with it, making progress in steady strides with friends alongside. Whether it be swinging a bat or simply walking around, there are all kinds of latent skills to rediscover. It doesn't take too much to recognize the strength that can be found, and for the sake of staying in shape, there can be no other greater motivation than being part of something meaningful. A rower or a weightlifter would know about the push and pull that comes with getting in the zone to raise your fitness. You can be a leader, bold and bright for all to witness. You can push through.
I hope you enjoyed some of the videos and pictures of our homeland in New Zealand. And I'll begin with a first slide, just showing you where I'm from. That's the clock tower at the University of Otago. Table tennis for brain health and cognitive well-being is what I'm going to be talking about. About a kilometer from the clock tower is where we play. We host a Parkinson's group every Friday. We have 19 individuals now, and there's about 8 other groups throughout the country. I was excited to find that last year we had a women's and girls initiative started in New Zealand. We've got numerous programs for the children from a very, very young age, and Otago table tennis is very, very close to where we are in the university. And we've got a very, very full schedule of events and excitement going on there. First, it's very important to share a common language, as the previous person has already told us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about mental processes, which is also called cognition. Cognition is something that we're all actually familiar with, even if we don't know the names to assign to the components of cognitive function. We all think. We all have attention. We all have language learning, memory, perception, inhibition when we try not to do something, anticipation, planning, goal setting, spatial processes, and you might be familiar with the term executive function. That also is a sort of umbrella term for a lot of different cognitive processes. Now, cognitive processes is something we hear far less about. But I'd like to tell you today that I think table tennis is one of the most perfect activities to develop our cognitive processes and to exercise those cognitive processes along with the physical processes, because it's all those that takes us through our lives, from being very, very young to all the way into growing old. And I'd like to suggest that the more we practice and exercise our cognitive processes as well as our physical processes, the better we will be. We will do the best possible thing we can for ourselves. We'll be investing in ourselves and our families and all the people around us. I'll take us back a little bit now to about 1906. Ramon y Cajal, a neuroanatomist from Spain, and he coined a term, a very important term, the neuron. The neuron is the simplest unit of transmission in the brain. And you can see here this beautiful neuron. Its cell body here. It's got this projection coming from it. That's called an axon. And at the end, you see these sort of tentacles or fingers. And those guys are reaching out to another neuron, and another one, and another one. So these are all working together in this big, massive brain that you can see here. This folded area here, the cortex, is something probably we're most familiar with, and I'll refer to. So Cajal also had a hypothesis called cerebral gymnastics, according to which he said that the brain capacity is augmented by increasing its connections. It's sort of like a dense forest, as you can see here. Many, many connections forming that rich, beautiful brain that we all have. Optimizing the processes of health, mental health, brain health, and well-being is something that should be on everybody's agenda. What I'd like to do now is just fast forward a little bit to about 10 years ago to introduce you to a technique called brain imaging. Some of you have already seen this, but brain imaging is one of the methods by which neuroscientists are using to investigate effects of exercise, for example, on brain health. This particular study wasn't yet on exercise. Exercise is a very, very new kind of venue in terms of, or something new to research, particularly in table tennis. But in this one, what we tried to do is isolate a very, very simple task we call a go-stop task. You can imagine yourself playing table tennis, and you're standing there with your bat, and you're ready. At some point, you have to go. You have to make a movement. You have to go. There's something in your brain, a very simple sort of switch, may not be so simple, that's allowing you to go. But there are other times when you have to stop or inhibit. You have to slow down a little bit. That very, very simple component function is something that is present in our everyday activities, almost everything we do. And in table tennis, it's such a fast game that we now have to make these decisions very, very quickly. We have to decide quickly to stop and quickly to go. So we exercise that basic component every single time we play. What we were able to do is to test people who have Parkinson's disease, sort of a mild or moderate level of Parkinson's disease, against people who don't have Parkinson's disease. And in this case, we asked people to remain on their normal medication regime. We asked them to do a test like this a whole bunch of times, because you need to do, in research, you have to do things over and over and many, many, many times, because people are quite variable, and so is the brain. So we need many, many, many trials. It's not an exciting task to be our participant in, but it's necessary. It's not only necessary to have many, many trials, but we need many, many, many people doing many, many, many trials so that we can then derive something that's constant so we can make comparisons against our control group and see if there are any differences. Well, in this basic task, we ask people to lie in a brain scanner. They're lying here, the brain is here, and this bench then gets pushed in, and the person from the lying position, we're able to use a series of mirrors so that we can project this task, and a person can do the task while lying in the scanner. We can then register brain activity. Well, it was interesting what we found about a decade ago. In this case, the people who had Parkinson's disease versus the control group, performed the same. They were just as fast to do this little task of pressing a button when it was green and not pressing a button if it was red. The error was the same, their reaction times were the same. But something very, very interesting came out of the brain imaging data. And if you can look here, we've got the controls on the left. Perhaps I should be using, okay. We've got the controls on the left, the Parkinson's on the right, and we've got the go task, which we call activation, and the inhibit task, or the stop task, we call inhibition. What you can see, though, these are cortex regions, and you can see that the same basic regions are active in the two groups. But I think you'll notice right away, there's more activity in the group with Parkinson's compared to the group who are controls. And similarly, in our inhibition task, which is the red light telling you not to move, you still get more activity here than you do in the control group. Now, with Parkinson's disease, for example, the parts of the brain we hear much more about are down below the cortex, the basal ganglia, the striatum is what they're called. And if I look at the activity there, and I've plotted it slightly differently here, those dotted lines, let's see, backwards. Yep. The dotted lines are these here. That's the Parkinson's group, and this is just through time, plotted through time in this direction. And the solid lines are the control group. And what you can see is, yes, in fact, there's a slightly weaker signal at the level of the striatum, those that are best known for being affected by the dopamine system in Parkinson's. Slightly weaker signal. But remember, we have a stronger signal going on at the cortex. Well, in fact, it's a very, very complex system. So if we look here at this very complicated graph, please don't memorize this. But you can see that this level here, that's the cerebral cortex. And there are all these different labeled areas that neuroscientists use. It's a common language across people in neuroscience primarily. So we can talk about the brain in these different areas, the cerebral cortex. And then when we look at the basal ganglia, and here it's blown up, it's massive in size, but in reality it's very, very small, the basal ganglia. But the important thing I'd like to point out is the connections. The cortex here has connections that are feeding into the basal ganglia, all these connections. And then some magic goes on here in the basal ganglia, which we don't have time to talk about today, but we can. And then those connections go back up to the cortex. So what's going on is there's this two-way highway, two-way of information, the cerebral cortex talking to the basal ganglia and vice versa. Well, we can look into a completely other system as well. For example, research into Alzheimer's disease. So in this study, for example, that we were able to do, we were looking at age-related shifts in activity from brain imaging. And what we found there is that there's a posterior to anterior kind of sharing of information. So what's going on is that we again have these complex networks where there's certain networks in the brain that are coming to the party when other networks might be a little bit weaker. And in fact, this happens throughout our entire lives. And you don't have to have a neurodegenerative disease for this to work. Our brains are constructed in such a way that some networks talk to other networks, and through our lives, the shift in balance can occur through changes in the brain. Brain imaging is also used to study mild cognitive impairment, which is often indicative of initial signs of possible dementia. So also biomarkers of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. But what that is all telling us, from the brain imaging across a number of studies, is that there's a tremendous amount of neurocompensation in the brain. Neurocompensation. Stronger areas are coming to the party and helping less strong areas. And those, in fact, are changing throughout our lives through brain connections. And that change is often called neuroplasticity, brain change. And what's super important to remember is that we have highly, highly adaptive brains. Highly adaptive brains. Which begs the question, what can each of us do? What can we do to maintain our brain health and to optimize our brain health at whatever level it is? And to keep it in an optimized manner at whatever level we each have for as long as we possibly can. So there are many scientific studies beginning in this area, particularly in modes of exercise, and some in table tennis, including in our lab, which I'll tell you a bit about. But again, we need to first ask what activities will promote brain health, which is in everybody's interest. Well, one activity that's incredibly important, or any activity that's incredibly important, is one that has novelty. The brain loves novelty. The brain loves new learning. And the brain loves challenges. Anything that challenges the brain, that has novelty, is what the brain craves. And that alone can give us better brain health. And I think again to table tennis and think how very challenging it is. Every single time one is at the table, it's a challenge. Every single ball coming at us, watching the spin and trying to do so very quickly, it's a challenge. And of course it's novel because no two balls are the same. Never is there the same thing happening. And of course when we play, we always learn new skills. All the time. And of course, exercise is another thing the brain craves, really craves. And here are just some examples of studies in Alzheimer's disease, for example, to do with exercise, and suggesting that exercise is very, very helpful and possibly can slow the symptom severity and the symptom progression, and can also sometimes even ward off disease for longer. So it's relevant to everybody, whether we have a disease or not. Better regulation of brain glucose metabolism, which affects the insulin sensitivity and resistance, reductions in inflammation, reduction of amyloid beta protein, the main component of the plaques and the tau tangles. We don't yet know what precise regime is necessary, but that is something that will be researched much more heavily. And of course, also in Parkinson's, studies have been done dating back to about this one here on dance. Here are some aerobic versus goal-based versus control groups in people with Parkinson's, showing advantages in tasks like this tricky little task of cognition, where you have this feeling you want to read the word and say yellow, but the answer is not yellow, the answer is the color in which the word is presented. So the color is green, and you have to inhibit your tendency to say yellow. If you exercise, at least in this study, you're actually quicker to inhibit that information. Your inhibition system gets better through exercise. You also get better at a task like this, where you're connecting the dots, 1 to 2 to 3 and so forth, involving a lot of executive function and attention. And in fact, here, the people who have more impaired cognition, you can see, got better after the exercise manipulation, or the goal-based one, which was stretching and so forth. But people who didn't have those manipulations actually got worse at the task. So exercise might be something absolutely necessary, not just something would be good for us, but something necessary to uphold our health in our brain health. Well, I could be biased when it comes to table tennis, but if the things I've already talked about, challenge, learning, novelty, exercise, attention, control, inhibition, mental flexibility, it's all a big part of table tennis. But so is spatial processing, eye-hand coordination, dexterity and memory, use of our all-body movements and muscle strength, fast decisions, strategic thinking, numerical processes and keeping track, keeping score, following rules, many lovely social interactions, which the brain also craves. Social interactions are incredibly important to brain health. It's easily accessible, which is a very, very nice thing. And possibly most of all, it's really, really fun. I just wonder if table tennis maybe just ticks all the boxes for our physical systems. Not just that, but our mental systems and cognitive systems. It seems like it does. So what's needed? We need research, more research, pre-post interventions, longitudinal studies where we track people through time, keeping their exercise regime going and seeing what the changes are in the brain of the type that we're looking at with our brain imaging, for example, and correlate that with other variables throughout their lives. Does it make their lives better on a day-to-day level? Brain connectivity is a key component here, because each time we think or feel or we take an action, what we're doing is we're reinforcing that activity. Our new thoughts and our skills, we create these new pathways, and practice and repetition. All these things, really, table tennis seems to have all of that. By focusing our attention on the things we do, we're actually rewiring our brains. So there's encouraging studies in table tennis itself, but they're very, very, very new, including in our own lab, like within the last few years. They're encouraging, but they're small sample sizes. We need more samples. We need more people, more participants. We need more specific tasks in some of those studies. But one thing that's come out is table tennis is also relatively safe, and it's also accessible. And even people who have Parkinson's disease are able to play it. And there's not a huge risk of a big injury going on. At least I haven't seen one yet. So for an example, just an intervention recently, we just showed some table tennis. We had a manipulation where a person was just hitting the bat with the ball versus a more active table tennis kind of play. And just by interest of time, I don't have time to describe the whole thing, but we do have a paper. We were able to show that there's some emotional regulation benefits that are going on as well with table tennis. And here's a very, very recent study. We've just analyzed some of our data on brain imaging here, where people have to do some tricky task from observation. They have to predict where that ball actually landed. Was it on the table or not? They're lying in the scanner, and they're watching these clips, and they have to make that prediction. And yes, in fact, we found these areas in the back areas of the brain involved in prediction. So those are being exercised in that particular cognitive task prediction that we use all the time and that we practice in table tennis. So strengthening connections and building new ones is something I think that table tennis is just a beautiful sport to be using, a beautiful activity to be using. Briefly and quickly, because I'm just about done here, other benefits of exercise in general, and we need to test this with table tennis as well, reduction in depression and anxiety, and I already told you emotional regulation. And this was the study on anxiety. A number of different exercise manipulations were used, and anxiety decreased as a function of the interventions. And finally, neuroprotection, which is a super important one, reducing the risk, delaying the onset, and slowing disease progression. So just to summarize, improvements in mood and sleep with forms of exercise, reduction in stress and anxiety, insulin resistance, reduction in inflammation, stimulating release of growth factors, building and growing new blood vessels, improvements in memory and learning, and overall health of our brains. And in particular, this one here, BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Super important one, and this is one that's probably most heavily researched across the world. It's a molecule that supports growth and survival of neurons and change, and also protection against neurodegeneration. Now, most of these studies have been in rodents for obvious reasons. It's difficult to do this in humans, but there's no reason not to think this is also happening in humans. It's a highly conserved system. And in fact, exercise increases BDNF. And it also increases neurogenesis, brand new neurons being born in the brain. I'm cheating a little because I'm plotting it on a human brain, even though it's still in the rodent model. But down here in the hippocampus, those new neurons, and the hippocampus talks wildly with the cortex as well. And so there's another one of those connectivity types of systems that's at play. Optimizing brain health, I think, is super important. And I think it's important that we be optimistic about the future. I sure am. You saw this possibly last year, this exciting press release came out of worldwide types of collaborations. The Michael J. Fox Foundation in this case, the alpha-synuclein, an assay that can discriminate between people who have Parkinson's and people who don't. A fantastic, progressive kind of research coming out of collaborations across the entire world. So we can all hope and be optimistic that more such collaborations will happen. And if we can do such collaborations in the context of table tennis, I think we'll push it a really, really long way. Thanks very much to everyone, and thanks to the foundation team, everyone who made this festival and Congress possible, all the participants who are around, and your valuable lessons that we're learning. Every day we see you playing, and every time we interact with you. It's a collaborative thing. Everybody's learning from everybody else. It's a really, really special community, that table tennis. And also credits to those who helped with the video at the start. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Liz, for your very good presentation. We learned about brain, about table tennis, and about your expertise in this area related to neurodegenerative disease. Thank you so much. And we would like to invite our participants to send questions to Liz. And I will start with someone. I don't know, I think it's not necessary to translate the questions only. Okay. Thank you. Liz, why table tennis is a great physical activity and brain exercise as well?
Yes, a very good question. I do believe the components of table tennis, being all those cognitive types of components all in one activity, is really makes it so unique and such a good activity and exercise for brain health, cognition, mental processes, and also physical health as well.
Perfect. And one more question. Why table tennis is significant for the cognitive functions?
Yeah, it's also a good question. I've thought quite a lot about that. I think that every day, most of what we do, it is using our cognitive functions, whether it's the smallest task of attention when we're listening to someone or greeting someone, interacting with someone, or playing a game, playing a skill, learning a skill. And the thing is that when we look at the components of our everyday actions, we take them apart of those components. So many of those components are parts of table tennis, attention and memory, and the list just goes on and on.
So it's an unprevisible environment. So this unprevisible environment offered this opportunity to develop some.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the table tennis environment offers us all an opportunity, as you're saying, to practice all those cognitive skills, to learn something, to challenge ourselves and have novelty. And I think also importantly, it's such a fun environment. We're with other people, we're very close across the table, reading the signals from other people, the very skills that we need in our everyday lives. Yes.
Perfect. One more question. How much should we push this activity when diagnosis of a neurodegenerative disease?
Yeah, that's a very good question. How far should we push ourselves if we've been diagnosed with a neurological disease, neurodegenerative disease, or any disease? Or even if we haven't been diagnosed with a disease? I think it's really important that we don't substitute an activity for something else we're already doing. If you're, for example, on some sort of medication, say with Parkinson's, you would continue to interact with your neurologist in the normal way and continue the dose regime that you've been prescribed. It's not to substitute that in any way. Now, in terms of how much to push ourselves, it's a very important question. And as you know, since the ITTF with the table tennis for 4 years, doing with Parkinson's and so forth, it's still very new. So it's very important that we all learn from the participants. Even if it's your anecdotes you can tell us, that just goes a long way. The anecdotes of how you're feeling and how much of this sport, how much of a match you can do, how many games, how many sets you can do in a row before you think it's difficult. We need to share that information and interact and learn from each other because it's not known. It's really not known yet.
Perfect. And you are also a coach of table tennis?
Yes, I do coach a group of people who have Parkinson's down in Dunedin at Otago Table Tennis.
Perfect.
And I help out with some of the children programs, but primarily the Parkinson's now, yes.
So could you give us some advice in order to start coach or training people with neurodegenerative disease?
Yes, sure, thank you. There's some things I've noticed that I do think the coaching is slightly more effective if we adopt a few different things than we might do with children. There's a right way to teach a child how to do a forehand, and we drill the kids to do that forehand over and over, that repetition. But I think we need to remember that with, for example, someone with Parkinson's, oftentimes the person just can't do that forehand because of the movement problem. And I think it's really important that we embrace what a person can do and build on that, because we can we can really develop as quite tricky players very, very effectively. But it's not certain to me that drilling a perfect forehand is really the way to go. I'd much rather watch the talents of the people and then build on those talents as best we can. Of course, we're going to stick with the normal coaching procedures as much as we can, but allow some adaptability and flexibility as well, I think.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And do you have some questions?
Dr. Franz, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Doing those studies is time-consuming, energy-consuming. Collecting even 11 or 16 cases, I'm quite sure was a lot of work, so thank you for that. I would like to echo two key words that you used. One is challenging, and two is novelty. And so I live daily, I walk daily on this line. Do I overwhelm you, or do I challenge you enough? And that behavior comes from experience, from learning from them, from learning from the participant to our program. So I share your experience. Should I push you more? Do I overwhelm you? Am I giving you too many tasks? Or I'm challenging you enough? Because that's indeed what the brain needs. The brain needs to be challenged, but in a fun way. And so I need to play with you in a different way that I will play with her, because I need to grasp information from you and play with those information. Be playful with your brain, with your body, with your expression, knowing, though, that I'm going to keep walking on this line, challenging you for a novelty. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you very much.
More questions? One more.
Thank you so much. I'm Famum Victorine, coming all the way from Cameroon, Africa. A former tennis player. I am an Olympian of the Beijing 2008 Olympics, a World Cup participant in Guangzhou, and a former African champion. And when I heard of this Congress, talking table tennis and health, certainly in Africa is not well developed and certainly new. So I thought that participating would be another way of getting knowledge and transferring them back to my continent. But it's so intense and so rich and in such a very short time that I don't know how we'll get them. But I would like certainly to get further information on this. And my question goes to us. Certainly, we may not have the same environments, and behavioral patterns and standards have a norm, but vary with environment. How then can we, in such an environment, influence the game of table tennis, especially with people with very health, maybe not Parkinson's, because yet we are yet to find that in Cameroon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think I saw you play earlier, and I realized you were a fantastic player right away. So, I think you're absolutely right, and I think participation, the more we can get, and as you said, and the gentleman said before, interacting and watching and observing and sharing our information and learning from each other.
More questions?
Sorry, there are online questions.
I'm just going to read the questions from the online audience. So there's one question that says, the more a skill process is repeated, the more likely neuroplasticity will occur. In otherwise, the brain uses a new pathway to perform a desired task. To be honest.
Should I comment on that?
I think, yeah, that's the question. Like, the more a skill is repeated, the more likely neuroplasticity will occur. Question
Yes.
mark.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The more we repeat a particular thing that we are practicing, though it's said that the neurons that wire together fire together. So that becomes strengthened through neuroplasticity, just as you say. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That question was from Steve Rayleigh, so thank you. The next question was from Tapuva Chitambo, and it's saying, thanks for sharing on adaptable coaching. I have some kids who have proved to be slower in developing the contemporary drills. So from now on, I'm going to focus more on adapting. So it's more of a thank you to you.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Then there's another question from Sima Limoch. To start training with Parkinson patients, which sport element can be more suitable for the preliminary stage?
Which component did you say?
Which sport element was?
Sport element for the preliminary stage. I'm not certain I understand the question fully, but I suppose with a new sport, we always want to learn the fundamentals, the basic strokes. And as you said before, and the person asked before, as we repeat that, we get better and better at it because that system underlies it, gets stronger and stronger. So learning the basic fundamentals, repeat, 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 I think that's probably the way to go.
Thank you. Then there's a last question, which is saying, is it because of the role of both hemispheres in the brain? I assume the question is like, is table tennis improving the connection between the two hemispheres?
Very interesting. Thank you for that question. That would most likely be one element of it. You're absolutely right. Each of the two cerebral hemispheres talk to each other through the corpus callosum, this vast band of fibers, billions of them. And yes, there would be lots of information transfer between those hemispheres in table tennis, absolutely for sure. And the corpus callosum is a key player in sport and also in brain health and so forth. So yes, I would fully agree with that.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is related to people with neurological diseases. And if you believe that playing table tennis can reduce the use of drugs by them?
No, it's an area that's way out of medicine and the dosage and so forth. And we're definitely not saying to substitute a medication regime for something like table tennis. This is something you add to your everyday activity, and it would be the person's doctor, neurologist, and so forth that the person should speak with about that. And also, even if a person is deciding to take up a sport, table tennis or another, and hasn't been an athlete before, hasn't been doing that regularly, really good idea for the person to talk to his or her medical doctor, neurologist, and discuss that with that person. Yeah.
If I may take up from the last question, and I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Antonio Barbera, a physician living with multiple sclerosis, and I work with people with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson, and dementia. Anecdotally, I may answer that to you. I have several of my participants with Parkinson, living with Parkinson, that told me, I'm reducing my dosage of my medication. Now, as you said, there is nothing that has been already proven, nor efficiently studied. But anecdotally, the same way they tell me, Antonio, I go back home, and the next 4 hours, my brain is so sharp. Antonio, I went to the ophthalmologist, and they told me my vision is improving. Antonio, I'm reducing my medication. Now, this is an anecdotal experience, and again, we need to produce data, and I really encourage all of us that are trying to produce data behind the efficiency and the benefits of this sport to sit down together and say, okay, let's put together our brain, let's challenge our brain with a novelty, and bringing each of us our own expertise to produce data to anybody to be beneficial for the society. And again, anecdotal, they have been telling me, Antonio, I'm reducing my dosage. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to just read out some more online comments, questions. One is from a person from Zimbabwe. Sorry if I am not pronouncing your name too well, but from Tapua Chitambo. The person says, we don't have much Parkinson patients in Zimbabwe, but we have other condition-related ailments which fits. Can we apply the same concepts to all coordination-related diseases?
Maybe Dr. Barbaro is more the better one to answer the question.
It is actually a very good question. I tell everybody, if you do have a brain, table tennis is for you. As Dr. Franz was saying, and also the previous gentleman from UNESCO, the brain is the key. Now, we are aging, and somebody else will talk about aging, but the process that happens in our brain, especially in the hippocampus, in this little area that we have that produce new cells if we challenge our brain and produce new connections, we all of us have the same portion of brain. If I look at the audience, we are probably around 45 and above. Our brain is shrinking, so why don't we challenge our brain? Why don't we enjoy more our brain? Why don't we play more with our brain, learning new things and having fun? So the question is, anybody with a brain will benefit. And all of us that play table tennis, we know how we struggle with our own brain, but we are so joyful and we are pleased when we are able to produce something, because that's a fun component of our sport as well, that is part of the stimulating the neurogenesis. So not just because people have some specific neurological conditions may benefit, but everybody with a brain.
Thank you. One more comment. It's a bit more technical, medical, but I'm going to read it out. Further to my last, this is from Steve Riley. It's a follow-up from one of the previous comments he has made. If a neuro pathway connection is broken, with neuroplasticity, is a new pathway created, thus rerouting around the damaged area?
Can do. Yes, I mean, the brain works, it's not guaranteed, but the brain does work in such a way. And I think there's a lot of sort of what we would call redundancy in the brain, meaning that different portions can come to the party. Now, there's going to be limits. If a person has had a stroke and there's damage to that area, you're not going to be able to regenerate the area as such if the axons, projections, and all can't go through anymore. But yes, in fact, you can go, maybe some projections can work around it and still make connections. So as Dr. Barbaros was saying, if you engage in the activity and continue to exercise the brain is going to attempt to find those new connections and produce those new connections. Vast, many connections. We don't want to underestimate the adaptive brain.
And finally, I also have a question, if that's okay. So the foundation, as you know, we conduct the World Parkinson's Table Tennis Championships as well as the World Alzheimer's Table Tennis Championships. Now, the Parkinson's Table Tennis Championships is the 4th edition, and we have more than 150 participants for it. But for the World Alzheimer's Table Tennis Championships, we're still growing. We have a limited number of participants. So in your opinion, how do we reach out to, or how do we encourage the community, specifically the Alzheimer's community, to take table tennis more into their realm of lifestyle?
It's a real good question. I think the people who are participating here at the tournament, let's say the subset of people who have Alzheimer's, you yourselves can talk to other people, and you yourselves are the ones showing it's possible. So you are the ones who are able to propagate that word as well. If we all reach out, we all talk with each other, and we all learn from each other and discuss our anecdotes and interact further, that can travel quickly. You said it started as a grassroots. That grassroots is still operating. So I would just encourage people to talk about their experiences. We had a few people coming to our Parkinson's group, and then week after week, more people came because those people told someone else, who told someone else, who told someone else. So we can advertise, but I think the person anecdote and the person experience is super, super valuable. So we'd love to hear from you. For all of you participants, we'd love to hear from you and hear your stories as well.
Thank you so much.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Zoran Primorac, and I would like to ask you one question about what has to be done that table tennis become official therapy recognized by the health organization, also through the health insurance in the local communities, because it will be a tremendous impact on table tennis if it become really official therapeutic skill that we can really heal these diseases. This is what has to be done, and what is the next step from your point of view?
Yes, very good question. I mean, for anything to become a therapy, the gold standard is the clinical trial, as you well know, where you have control groups, you have experimental groups, you have the intervention, and so forth. Unfortunately, those do take time, but I do think that is something we should be trying to do. We need to invest in that. Those also cost a lot of money. But I think if we had multi-centers participating and we're able to do that and talk to each other and interact in an organized manner, I do think we could do that and have the gold standard clinical trial, which is really what's needed, I think. In the meantime, we can continue with the research that's being done and increase the sample size to the extent possible and record the variables that we can. But yeah, we need I think the funding and the organization and the people and the collaboration.
So we'll have one final comment, if that's okay.
Physical activity has currently been used as a prescription. All the official organizations, the Parkinson Foundation, the National MS Society, the Alzheimer Association, and basic practitioners, now they say you need to practice. You need to take your insulin for your sugar, you need to check your blood pressure. Physical therapy is part of our daily activity. Now, if we go back for a second to which one is the best physical activity, for example, for fall prevention, we still do not know which one it is. Well, if you ask me, and probably if you ask Dr. Franz, we are going to say table tennis. But really, we still do know which one is the best activity. There's been several studies that have been comparing different physical activity to see which one is the best in fall prevention. Now, to be able to say scientifically, well, table tennis will give you this benefit and this benefit, especially compared to Tai Chi, to dance, to any other form of physical activity, we need to be stronger together and produce new numbers, stronger number, higher number, and say those are the benefits. But currently, physical activity is prescribed as a form of life. It's prescribed medically, yes. Thank you.
And maybe just to add a little onto that too is we definitely want people to be doing physical activity even if it isn't table tennis. We all should be as active as we possibly can. It's lovely if it's table tennis, but that's not the only thing that's out there. So we definitely don't want to make it a space race. Yeah, you know? So that's important too, that we all encourage physical activity, and this is a fantastic option for physical activity. But yes, yeah.
Sorry, we have one final question back here.
My name is Massimiliano Iachini. I'm from Italy. I follow Italian Association of Parkinson Giovani. And we start also to practice sport because when I started to was diagnosticated Parkinson, immediately I say we need to do sport. But unfortunately, in this time, the doctor say, no, why sport? So only is recently it is advisement. And fortunately, now the people follow this, but it's very strong for our doctor to accept this and to stimulate, to motivate us to do. So we need to incentivize this, and we need to give the opportunity to the people to do something for their level. So we can't, for instance, arrive here to play five match, 6 matches in one day, and to play until it's 9 o'clock in the night. So we need to create also a program scheduling. We listen to people. You need to listen to people to arrange what do you need, what do you need to arrange. So the wait for us to wait a lot of time until that is our turn. So we need to also, for our autistic people, we need to know what we are going to do in the next few hours. So we need to invest in this time to increase this activity. And of course, in Italy, we discovered the dance and the neural mirror is super. We miss this to copy neural mirror, to use our neural mirror, because for a long time we remain closed in the house, and we need to start to motivate the people to go outside. So to arrive here for me was very strong, because after 18 years of Parkinson, it's very difficult to move, to fly. And for me, it was the best time until I was diagnosticated with Parkinson. I fly to India to have Ayurvedic treatment. And so you need to help the people. And also with dancing, music is fantastic. And for instance, when the people remain frozen with music and with meditation, with relaxation, you restart again. And also the voice, maybe now it starts to decrease, but unfortunately, I suggest to practice the voice, because if you stay without the people around, because make emotion, because our brain is, the emotion is a big problem. We need to imagine beautiful things. We need to imagine beautiful places, and the beauty is our goal, is our medicine, because to think to the beauty is the way to think to the cure. Thank you.
I think you made some really beautiful points. And I also wondered, one thing we didn't say here, good food. The brain obviously needs good food, colorful food, as you say, and also an enriched environment is important. And an enriched environment, I like to think we get on our way to the arena as we walk to the arena and breathe the air and see the trees and so forth. Those are all things, as you mentioned as well, that are super important, and to appreciate the music and the sounds, you know, all those receptors, that information goes to our brain. So all of what you're talking about is important. We don't want to just do one thing. We don't want to have that message that. So I think what you capture in what you said is just so beautiful and important. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you very much for your presentation and to clarify the questions from the audience. Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Claude to translate to French. And yeah, also I need to put some key points, Claude. So, thank you. And I think the take-home message that this speech of Liz give to us is the brain loves novelty, the brain loves challenge, and the table tennis it's able to offer this experience to our brain. But we need to increase the number of the research to make a more robust environment to prescribe table tennis to people with neurodegenerative diseases.
So, merci Liz pour votre brillante présentation très claire. J'espère que les Français ont quand même compris avec les dessins. Moi, ce que j'ai surtout retenu, c'est qu'il faut que tout le monde pratique le sport ou de l'activité physique, pas seulement les personnes qui sont atteintes des maladies comme Parkinson et Alzheimer, mais pour ces personnes-là, c'est encore plus important parce que ils en ont plus besoin, mais pour développer notre cerveau, c'est important que tout le monde fasse du sport. Et le tennis de table semble avoir un rôle très important et très particulier dans cette aide. Et en fait, la question qui a été posée par Zoran Primorac, c'était de savoir comment le tennis de table pourrait être reconnu comme un médicament, comme une thérapie pour arrêter l'évolution de ces maladies. Il semblerait qu'il y avait déjà quelques réponses. Lise a donné quelques réponses. Elle a dit le tennis de table, c'est un sport facile d'accès et aussi pas dangereux. Donc pour les gens atteints de maladies, Parkinson ou Alzheimer, il n'y a pas beaucoup de risques qu'ils se blessent. Donc on a un avantage là-dessus. Maintenant, il faut, comme on l'a dit, faire plus de recherches, tous ensemble, collaborer à tous les niveaux pour pouvoir vraiment prouver que le tennis de table peut vraiment aider les personnes ayant ces maladies et voire même, comme l'a dit le docteur, peut-être diminuer les prises de médicaments, etc. Même si pour l'instant, ce n'est pas du tout officiel, pas du tout recommandé, pas du tout vérifié scientifiquement, mais il semblerait qu'un jour ou l'autre, ça puisse arriver. J'étais un peu plus longue que ce qu'il fallait. Merci beaucoup, Litz, pour votre intervention.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you for attending the first presentations of the day. And now I invite Leandro Ovec, ITTF Foundation Director, who has a very special announcement to make.
Thank you very much, Thais. A pleasure to be here addressing you, and especially also those online following us. And from the first presentation, we heard the importance to reach people in the sport community, but also people outside the sport and table tennis community to address the importance of the sport for the people's health. We also heard in the recent presentation from Dr. Liz the importance of how can table tennis or sport in general improves people's life, people's health. And we need to amplify the way we communicate with our internal and external stakeholders. For that reason, the ambassadors are very important for us. We need them. From the beginning of the foundation, we created a program called FANS, because we need ambassadors to help us to fundraise, but also to help us to advocate, to help us in the networking to reach different stakeholders, but also to support us. So this is an acronym called FANS. And from the beginning, we have 3 ambassadors. One of them is a very well-known Ryu Seung-min from South Korea, an Olympian medalist. Galia Dvorak from Spain, also an Olympian. And we recently appointed Sharat Kamal Ashanta from India as an ambassador for our foundation. So we would like to announce a next ambassador dedicated to health in particular. But before doing that, I would like to invite to the stage the 2 members of our governing board at the foundation, the Princess Sina Rashid of Jordan, if you can come to the stage for this symbolical little ceremony. And an applause for her, please. Princess Sina, you have been not very involved in table tennis. You have been an Olympian twice, but you're not only connected to table tennis, you are very close to Taekwondo. And at the Jordanian Olympic Committee, you have been having an important work dealing with all different sports. So why do you think it's important to have role models, to have ambassadors promoting what we do?
Thank you, Leandro. Ambassadors and role models are people who have achieved excellence in their fields. And that puts them in a position of influence and in a position to inspire. And I think that's hugely important in spreading the message and the mission of the foundation and amplifying the impact of all the work that we do. So I think it's a hugely important step in having ambassadors of a high caliber, which we already do, and the addition of Zoran as well will be very influential for us at the foundation, and I look forward to working with all of them as well.
Thanks, Princess Sina. I would like to invite our president, Petra Schörling, also to make this announcement and to welcome a new ambassador.
Thank you very much, Leandro. Thank you, Princess Sina. I think that what we have been saying here during the morning is that we can all play a part, and we all have to play a part. So that's why, for me, it's so important that we are having role models that can help us as ambassadors. And we are very pleased to have such good names and such good ambassadors within our sport. So I'm very, very proud and happy to be here today and announce another new ambassador. So, of course, I didn't know that I had the pleasure to invite for the scene Zoran Primorac, 7-time Olympian, and, well, also very proud to say that this is one of our legends that not only have been performing very, very well, as you all know, on the playing field, but also have continued to stay in our sport, contributing in different ways. I have had the pleasure to have him in the Atlas Commission chair position within the executive board of the ITTF, and it was a true pleasure. A very active former player, now also president of Croatian Table Tennis, and since last week also vice president of the European Table Tennis Union. So thank you for all that you have done for table tennis, and thank you for all that you will do now as a new ambassador for ITTF Foundation. Thank you, Zoran.
Photo opportunity first. Yeah. If you can say a few words for him.
First, it's a great honor. Thank you very much for choosing me to be an ambassador, because it's with such a notable name such as Rio Songmin, Olympic champion, Anchanta Kamal, also Galia Dvorak. I think we'll do a great job. Thank you for foundation to choosing me, and also I remember what Petra you said before. 2018, I approached you with a couple of friends during the World Championships 2018 in Halmstad. Actually, the patients came to us and they said the table tennis is helping them to decrease the symptoms of Parkinson. And then ITTF was, together with the foundation, very wise, and they recognized the opportunity and the need. And also, we created the next year the World Championships 2019 in Westchester. It was the first World Parkinson Championships. That means now we are here in the World Congress, Health Congress. I think it's a very great thing what ITTF is doing. We have to be aware that table tennis can help really from early stages until the late stage of your life, that table tennis is what kind of sport we can help increase our quality of life. And as you said, the slogan is table tennis for all, table tennis for better life. But I will add something else, united and together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Zoran.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your participation during the morning session of our Congress. And I would like to remind you, our after session starts at 2 p.m. Thank you so much.